Thank you for joining us for our last Beyond the Field for the semester and the academic year. So I know final exams are right around the corner, so we really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to be here. And as always, it's your support by being here that allows us to continue to do these amazing events. Today we have three amazing guests, all women in sport leadership. We have Mary Ellen Gillespie, just on the edge. We have Elena DiGiorgio in the middle, and Beth Getz here at my end here. So if you just join me in giving them a warm welcome to So Mary Ellen is Director of Athletics of the University of Hartford. She is the first woman to serve in this role at the University of Hartford and started in the summer of 2017. Previously, she was the Director of Athletics at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay for 4 years. She has also held leadership positions at Bowling Green State University, Purdue University Schools of Nursing and Health Sciences, the North American Interfraternity Conference, the University of Iowa, and the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. In addition to these impressive accomplishments, she is a member of the NCAA's Division I Women's Basketball Committee and the Division I AAA Board of Directors. Elena DiGiorgio is Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Elms College, just in Chicopee, Massachusetts, just past Springfield. She has held positions at the University of Tennessee and Western Illinois University. At Tennessee, she was a member of the Multicultural Mentorship Program and Ad Hoc Diversity Committee. Prior to that, she was at Western Illinois, where she founded the Women Empowering to strengthen community and support for female athletes. And she's also an active member of the North American Society for the Sociology of Sport and has presented at numerous conferences on topics related to intersection of race and gender in college athletics. Beth is currently the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Woman Administrator here at University of Connecticut. She oversees all internal departments within athletics and serves as a key member of the division's leadership team. She is also the sport administrator for our UConn football team. She was previously served as the deputy and intern AD at Minnesota, the associate athletic director and the senior woman administrator at Butler, and also held several different roles at Missouri St. Louis, including women's soccer head coach, assistant athletic director, and senior women's administrator. So thank you all for being here. It's an impressive resume there.
Up to your questions and be able to continue on from there. So I'd first just like to start by hearing each of your stories and kind of how you got to where you are today, the journeys you took, because I know each of them are quite different. So Mary Ellen, will be
So I sometimes tend to tell people I took a little bit of a non-traditional path to the athletic director chair, and that I did not compete as a student athlete when I was in college. I wasn't good enough to get recruited. I was a multi-sport athlete in junior high and high school, but I always had a passion for playing sports, was involved at SUNY Plattsburgh as an undergrad, intramurals, club sports, things like that. But I really found my first passion for graduation in student affairs. So I spent my first 15 years of my profession really working, always in higher ed, but in student affairs. I was a campus Greek advisor. I ran summer orientation. I was a hall director. I did that at Iowa, and then I got into the academic side of campus as a fundraiser. I went to Purdue University as a director of development in the schools of nursing and health sciences, and was getting ready to make my way into athletics development at Purdue when someone that I worked closely with got the athletic director job at Bowling Green State University. We had worked together on doing some combined athletic and academic gifts, 7-figure gifts for both nursing and athletics, and he got to see my work in development, and he said, you know what, you have this unique background of student affairs, academics, and now I want to teach you athletics, but I also need a good fundraiser and someone who knows how an institution works. And so he asked me to take a leap of faith and go from Indianapolis to Bowling Green. And I did, and we were kind of joined at the hip for 7.5 years and built some great buildings at Bowling Green and renovated a lot of buildings, but I also really was fortunate to work for somebody who believed in empowering women and giving me new experiences and really letting me test the waters and take some risks and gain some really great experiences in administration. And then he went to Xavier University to become the athletic director, and I started getting calls from search firms and started to go through the athletic director search process and got to the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. Was the AD there for 4 years, and then I'm from New York originally, and so the heartstrings started pulling to come back to New York, in the New York area, and so when the University of Hartford called, I looked at it and gave it some thought and met some really great people who have been affiliated with that university, and so I jumped into the process, and 11 months later, here I am. So that's kind of my path. Yeah.
I have kind of,
Hello, there we go. I have kind of a unorthodox path in getting to a director of diversity and inclusion position because most of my experience has been in sport. So I was a Division I athlete. I was recruited for volleyball. I suffered a career-ending injury fairly early on in my career, which was an emotional roller coaster, and I think we talk a lot in sport about the transition from being an athlete to no longer being an athlete and the impact that it has on you emotionally, mentally, in terms of your identity. And that was something that I faced. It was pretty challenging because I was a sophomore. I also went through some other family. I had my daughter in my junior year of college, and that was another obstacle that I had to overcome and really realize, what are my priorities and what am I doing? And throughout that entire process, my senior woman administrator, when I was at Western Illinois University, always was a lending hand and really pulling me back to athletics. Your identity has been an athlete for so long, we're gonna bring you back. So she offered me a position with their student athlete athletic academic advising. And so I mentored athletes. I helped them obviously stay NCAA eligible and worked with football primarily, and then I had baseball as well. And it was really a learning opportunity for me to see, it's not just me that is going through some of these emotional trials, but it's also, as a uniform throughout athletics, a lot of these athletes are facing the same things. So beyond that, I realized working with football and baseball so closely, a lot of the female athletes would come to our office and say, hey, I need a female mentor, a female role model. And I was grateful that my boss at the time her name is Lisa Mills Jennings, so you can all look her up, and I really thank her a lot. But she encouraged me and another person in our office to develop We Women Empowering, and that was my first opportunity to oversee a program as large as it was. It was for all female student athletes, and we had about, for the first year, we had about 100 female student athletes participate in the program. And I was very proud of it. It was something that really encouraged me to not only think about the emotional side of it, but as well as the research side of it. So I continued on for my master's at Western. I stayed with athletic academic advising. I pursued my PhD at the University of Tennessee, and I had the opportunity to teach there. And the strongest struggle there was recognizing the wall between academia and practice. And in my first year there, I got involved with multicultural mentorship program. I was on the ad hoc diversity committee for the College of Education. And it was really an awesome opportunity to put my research into practice. However, I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with students anymore. And that was something that was really troubling. I was teaching, but unless, as you know, students come to your office hours, you're not really having that mentorship capacity. So I was really looking for more of a avenue to try and get back into athletics, and I became the director of diversity and inclusion at Ulms College, where now I oversee not only the the administration roles throughout the entire college for diversity and inclusion, but I also oversee men's basketball athletic academic advising capacity as well. So I'm their success coach, and I'm still heavily involved in their roles on campus, which is exciting for me, as that was my purpose in going back to more of an administrative role rather than a faculty pursuit. So that's where I am now.
So my role is I've had really more of a traditional, I think, path.
although an unplanned one. So I was going to be a therapist. I was a student athlete and wanted to be a therapist. So I was going to go to grad school and had a coaching staff that I played for in college that was extremely supported and invested in our futures and just kept pushing me to at least try working in athletics and try coaching. I just never considered it an option. Of course, I'm old enough that there weren't as many sport management programs around, certainly not at the undergraduate level that there are now. But so that's what I did. I started coaching while I was going to graduate school and really sort of lucked into a head coaching opportunity pretty young in my career. So I started at a Division II school. I coached for about 12 years total. And one of my favorite things about my experience was that if you start at a small institution, similar to what you hear, you get to wear a lot of different hats. And so while I was coaching, they started piling on these other responsibilities, which I thought were always intriguing. Whether or not you were passionate about each and every one, I had a chance to run the business office, to do some compliance, to do laundry in the equipment room, to line the fields before games. So I got a lot of opportunity to really explore all facets of the athletic department because of the size of the institution that we were in. And eventually it became apparent that I really was intrigued with the bigger picture. Early on, I always wanted to know, how's this going to affect my team and our program? But as I started to get to a place where I could make decisions and give input about what I thought was best for the department, that's sort of when I knew that the path that I wanted to go was more administrative in nature. So from there, I had an opportunity to move into administration at Butler University in Indianapolis. Again, a small operation, comparatively speaking. So I think one of the things that drew me to that position and also one of the reasons I was selected for that opportunity was, again, having a lot of different things on your plate. So I ran the compliance program there, but oversaw sports, the business office, and a few people to do to take care of a lot of responsibilities. But you could still really get the feel for how rewarding it could be and how much impact you could have on student athletes, but in a little bit of a different way. I know I miss coaching every day. The relationships you can have with those student athletes are really special as a coach. But I think as an administrator, you can choose how engaged you want to be with the individuals that you work with, and you get to know some of you in this room that I've gotten to know in a different way, and it's still really meaningful. So from Butler University, I had an opportunity to go to the University of Minnesota. Again, I really didn't plan my path. I just, I always was looking for an opportunity to grow where I was and get new experiences. And that was something completely different for me from a professional standpoint, just to see how things worked at that level with the scope at a very large public state institution. And so that was a tremendous experience. I got to see a lot of things. It was I was there at a really high-profile time, when not necessarily for the good reasons, but we made the ticker quite often during my 3.5 years there. And then had the opportunity to come here to Connecticut and had worked for David Benedict, with David Benedict at Minnesota, and obviously the reputation, the high academic expectations at UConn, coupled with the strong history and brand of athletics. This was an amazing opportunity that I couldn't pass up. So it was really excited to come, and I've enjoyed my time here and get to be engaged in really all aspects of the department. So it's been a great transition for me.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. It seems we have a pretty strong Midwest connection here between where you've lived or schools you've been to. So next I'd like to talk about the glass ceiling, and we talk about the glass ceiling across industries and women breaking it and shattering it and kind of reaching these new milestones in their career and kind of paving the way for the women to come behind them. So especially in sport, I think we've seen a lot more women promoted to leadership roles such as yours. And so I'm wondering, in your career, what you think, or what's alluded to some of those changes, and then how you've been able to break through. Who are the champions that have advocated for you? What are the skills, like you've talked about, in terms of diversifying your responsibilities, and kind of why you've been able to have the strength to do that?
Okay, I'll take that one.
So I think about the glass ceiling in my stage of my career. I'm fairly early on. I think we're all like kind of early in our careers in that we're not looking at our retirement plan yet, you know? So I think that every step of the way in undergrad, in my master's, in my PhD, in now my professional career, you know, I've always had somebody advocating for me and somebody that I've looked to as a mentor. And with Lisa at Western Illinois University, I had the opportunity to see someone who is not only an SWA but an associate AD, and really in a leadership role that I respected and I admired and I emulated. I wanted to be somebody that other student athletes could go to and have the types of conversations and relationships that she did. And so, you know, I looked to her and how she was able to navigate her path. And every mentor that I've ever had, I've been very fascinated by their pathway and their road to get there, because what they've done has really set the stage for what I'm able to do now. And with Lisa, you know, she's been at the same institution for close to 30 years, and she's really had to work from the ground up to get there, but she's never forgotten to pull the rest of us up with her. And that was why I was so impacted when we started Women Empowering. She was like she helped us in facilitating it because we were young and we didn't really understand. We just said we want to have this group, we want to direct it. But I think at this point, being somebody in a position where I can make change, especially as a director of diversity and inclusion, I'm overseeing the entire plan for the college that I'm at currently, creating opportunities for those who, traditionally haven't seen the glass ceiling. Like, we talk about it now as if we've gotten to this point where we're understanding and recognizing it. I don't think a lot of students see it as something that is an obstacle at this point, because they're still students, and once they're getting out into the field, they're recognizing it and they're experiencing it. So I'm really just educating and putting out the word and trying to get students to really start thinking critically about how they can impact it early and what they can do to navigate a society where it's not always friendly.
I think I've been really fortunate that I've had really great champions throughout my career, starting from my coaches, some athletic directors, administrators that have been really supportive of me and my ability to grow and learn and navigate what the future might hold. In my case, I think a lot of those champions have been men, and I think that was really important because that's who I was surrounded by at the time. And so finding people that will champion you, both men and women, that you can look up to as mentors, but really are going to go out of their way to help support you and guide you toward meeting your goals is really critical. And from that, it's our responsibility to give back. You got to make time for everybody that is interested in going the same path or a similar path, and make sure that you help navigate and push them in that direction as well. You don't believe you can get someplace until you start to see people that look like you that might be in those roles, and that's critically important. And so giving back and spending time with them to help them really decide what is the best step for them, how can they learn, how can they grow, who can you connect them with, I think is really what it's all about. But you've got to work at those relationships. I think we talk about, and you probably learn a lot about this in class, everybody says, hey, you got to network and pass out business cards and emails, but it's about relationship. It's not about how many people you know and how many people you have in your Rolodex. It's who can you commit to really investing in what's important to them, and they invest in your future as well. So can you build those critical relationships? And when you do, they're often those that are going to sustain you throughout the remainder of your career.
Short, because I echo both their comments, but I also believe really strongly in what I call a personal board of directors. When I first got to Green Bay, as every headline was first female AD in Green Bay history, it was very uncomfortable because I wanted I wanted to know that I got the job based on my merits, not that I was making history to be the first female AD at Green Bay. But then I had some of my mentors and some of my personal board of directors members kind of pull me aside at a conference and say, look, I worked really hard to be a trailblazer as a female in athletics, and so the work of so many women years and years ago to help us get to where we are, like, you need to, like, bathe in the fact, or marinate in the fact that you are a strong woman who just became a Division I AD in a highly, highly male-populated profession. So celebrate that, and then, like Beth said, pay it forward too. So I am committed to, I've always had a passion for what I would call building lives and building leaders and changing lives, and I truly believe we do have to pay it forward and empower other women, and I'm lucky that I have 2 women that I work with every day here at Hartford, Holly and Stacy, who I'm committed to helping them elevate if that's what they truly want to do, and I know that they do, so I'm committed to that. But having good mentors, we grew up, how many of you grew up hearing it's all about who you know, right? I mean, I heard that from the time I started college. It is also about who knows you, and when you build the relationships that Beth was just talking about, those people will help you get to where you want to be. But you have to tell them where you want to be, because if you don't advocate for yourself, it's going to be pretty hard for someone else to do that as well. And so the personal board of directors, the relationships, and just knowing people well enough to have them believe in you and to push you. That's what your mentors need to be doing. They need to push you. Because I think a lot of times women, we have this self-doubt chromosome, right? And so I remember when I first got contacted for my first AD job by a search firm, you know, you see the bullet point list of roles and responsibilities or experiences that you had to have just to get the job, and I'm like, okay, there's 15 bullet points on this list, and I've only done 13, right? And I'm like, I don't have the 2, so I'm not ready for this, right? And it took some men to tell me, seriously? Like, you have more than I had when I applied for my first AD job, and I got it, I only had maybe 4 of those bullet points. So again, it's those relationships and mentors and personal advisors that need to push you because they believe in you and they know what you want to do. So those relationships are so, so important.
Thank you for sharing those stories and the importance of mentors. I hope you all are looking for mentors or have mentors or remain in good contact with the faculty. And for those in the sport management program and here on campus, I think you're set up pretty well. The next question, our guest last month was Dr. Ellen Starowski from Drexel University, and she kind of gave a breakdown of the history of athletics and then the separation, or I guess convergence of the men's and women's athletic departments. So I think continuing from that conversation, because we have a lot of the same students here, I'm wondering what your opinion of that now is, and considering, you know, how college football and college basketball, men's basketball are taking off, and we've seen more involvement in women's basketball. If you think that could work, what that might look like, some of the positive and negative effects of that. If you could just, you know, give your opinion or what you've seen, that would be great.
So that's an interesting one, and I wish I would have heard her speak about that, because I know when you sent the list of questions, that's not one I've been asked before. I think from my perspective, there are things. It seems to me there's been a lot of advantages that we've seen by the when those departments have combined. So we started to think about what is best for all of our student athletes, and giving different types of opportunities to the young women that played sport that the men maybe had been receiving in their own side of the building, because that's a little bit what it was like back then. So I think there's been some advantages to that, and I would worry if you went back to that, how much of the experience would be marginalized, and maybe it wouldn't. It's not something that you've studied, but I do think that it has contributed to a feeling in most cases that everyone knows you're going through the exact same things. There's not a thought that the women's teams are working half as hard as the men, and they never were, but now you have and are provided with the same types of experiences. Within that, I do think there's room to look at some sports in different ways based on an economic model or what they may take from a department as opposed to give back to a department. And I think those are definitely points that are worthy of discussion. And gender certainly plays a piece in that because when you're talking football and men's basketball, there's an economic contribution that comes back to a department and to society based on the revenue they generate. But I think that is more about the economic model than it is about gender. It's interesting, I do think as you talk about the decrease in the number of female coaches, although we're seeing a little bit of a rise certainly recently in administration, which has been great. We should celebrate that. Everybody should be so excited about this last year. But I do think it's interesting that there may be more opportunities if you were in that model for women, and all those opportunities are likely to be on the women's side. So I think it's just it's an interesting discussion to see what something might look like if you went back that direction.
I hope we never go back in that direction because I think opening up the gates and combining men's and women's athletic departments where it's one administration line and not two different schools, I think has helped women. The fact that Beth is the sport administrator at UConn for football is huge in our business. So few women get the opportunity to supervise football. Why? Because a lot of presidents and boards of trustees and boards of regents don't think that a woman can supervise football because she never played it. That's BS, come on. So the fact that women are supervising men's basketball, I mean, that did not happen. It didn't happen 15, 20 years ago. And maybe it was two women in the country were doing it. So I think having that one combined umbrella is the right move and the right model. I mean, we still get it today. When I get introduced as an athletic director, people say, but you're just for the women's sports, right? No. So I hope we don't go back in that direction. I mean, men and women work together everywhere you go. We should certainly be doing it in college athletics. So
I'm going to provide an alternative perspective. Because I think it's very interesting that we're having this conversation at UConn where the women's basketball teams are much more powerful in terms of like championships recently. I also went to the University of Tennessee where Pat Summitt was reigning champ for women's basketball. And I think it's interesting having those perspectives on sport because I was around when alums during the Lady Vols era were throwing riots and like extremely upset because they were merging programs, and like we were around to like hear stories from those people who were very upset and disappointed by it because they felt as though they were taking away their identity as a Lady Vol and now we're all Vols. Which I thought was very interesting, having always researched gender and race, being like, yeah, equity, we need to combine, we need to have a unified front. However, I thought it was very interesting, especially having the same conversation at UConn, which is a women's powerhouse for basketball. I've heard, I don't know if this is true because I've never attended here, but welcome to UConn where the women are champions and the men are, I don't remember how it goes, but it was where the men are men and women are champions. And I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. Because if we did, and I'm not arguing for this by any means, but I think there are some anomalies where if you looked at donors and contributors, if you were a women's basketball alum and made it pro and you wanted to donate and contribute just to women's basketball, what would that look like if you were a women's only athletic department? But again, I think that that's coming from a very jaded perspective of being at a powerhouse like Tennessee with Pat Summitt and then being on UConn's women's campus.
Thank you. And so our next question, I think, Marilyn, your point about men and women work together every day. It's something so simple, but when you said that, I was like, you're right. It's a really interesting just tidbit and a way to think about that. So when we talk about the sports industry, I know we've had a lot of milestones recently in women in coaching and leadership roles, and it's awesome, and we definitely should celebrate these things. But it's also still very much a male-dominated industry. So I'm wondering, just on a personal level, do you ever find yourself maybe early on in your career, or even still now today, like policing your appearance or the way that you present yourself or communicate with people, especially if it's men in higher roles or equal roles or other women, like if you've had any experiences noticing yourself doing that and how you've changed that?
I probably, when I got into athletics, had a little bit of an advantage in that I spent so many years working in the fraternity world, and I worked with men's fraternities. I worked with more men than sororities. So I had probably a good, 10 years being the only female in a fraternity's boardroom or at a fraternity's national convention. So it took away the intimidation factor for me when I got into college athletics, but I also knew some of the techniques of, I know how to elbow my way up to the table and make sure that I have a seat. And because a fraternity president told me, always take a seat at the table. Always get a seat at the table. And so I use that advice every day. I also, for me, I call myself real. Like, what you see is what you get with me. But I also know, from a professionalism standpoint, I try to, for every setting I'm in, I try to probably dress a step up. I think it's better to be overdressed than not be dressed properly or appropriately. I always make sure that I'm listening fully and that I think before I speak, because as a young professional, I was taught some very hard lessons by just speaking off the cuff or speaking with emotion. So I think before I speak, and I want to make sure that I am well prepared for every meeting. And sometimes I'm over prepared, but I want to make people proud of me. I want to be credible. I want to set a good example, and I want people to know that I know what I'm talking about. So I do my homework, I come prepared, and I think before I speak. But I probably did have an advantage because I spent so many years in a male-dominated world to begin with before I got into athletics. But I will say, I also have really great male mentors along with female mentors, and they are very, very supportive. And I think as women professionals, I think you need men to advocate and empower you. It needs to be part of your team.
I was actually going to echo a lot of what you say about policing yourself in terms of appearance, because I think one of my challenges is I'm probably the youngest person in the Northeast to be a director of diversity and inclusion, as well as being a Black woman in this position and having the intersectionality of both roles. Because the first thing you see when you walk in is I'm 6 foot. The second thing you see is the curly hair, and then probably that I'm female, And so I think I've had to police myself in a lot of different ways. I don't come to the office in braids. I don't come as a Black woman presenting myself a certain way because I don't want to give off the appearance as if I'm the angry Black woman fighting for diversity at a college, even though that's my job. And so I think it's unfortunate that we almost have to extra try and extra prepare and extra everything just to be seen as on the same level as our male counterparts. And I was here for when we had Shireen, where she so eloquently put, live every day with the confidence of a mediocre white man. And not necessarily in a bad sense, but just the fact that a lot of times we're comparing ourselves to men. Women are comparing ourselves to men as if that's the standard, where that doesn't need to be the standard. The greatest piece of advice that I've kind of tried to live by is live up to the standard I am developing for myself, but don't become or don't change who I am. I don't have to be a man in order to do my job very well. I just need to be present and be realistic and set realistic goals for myself and for the administration. But I do have a very strong mix of male and female mentors, and recognizing the qualities and the traits of both that I like. It's not every single quality from a male that I am like, that's the leader I need to be. I think that I've really understood what I like in a mentor, what I like in a leader, what I like in a boss, what I like in even our institutional president that I am like so proud of. But there's also a lot of things and a lot of qualities that we all have that don't necessarily make us great leaders. And so I think it's important to recognize, you know, I walk into a room and the first thing you see is how you're going to perceive me. So I need to extra try in order to make sure that I'm coming across in a way that you're going to be receptive of what I'm saying when I can finally open my mouth.
So this may have been just blissful ignorance, but I really haven't felt in my career that I've faced many barriers based on gender, and that may be because I'm not opening my eyes enough to see that. But I also think that you know, my family, I was the oldest of 4 girls, and my mother sort of set this standard for us that we could do anything that we wanted to do, and it just never occurred to us. Or any of my siblings, that there was a path you were supposed to take as a female. I came out in athletics at the time where, and can still acknowledge all the hard work, as Mary Ellen mentioned, that people before me did to give me an opportunity to compete at the level. Right when I started, all the Division I soccer programs were just starting, and that was a result of Title IX and the hard work and sweat and effort of many before that push to give us those opportunities. But I've had such great champions, worked with great coaching staffs, that it has never really felt like it was a part of what I did on a day-to-day basis, with one exception. And I'm curious to see if you all have felt this way too, and particularly Mary Ellen, since you've done fundraising, but with donors. And I think that's just a relevant conversation, because no matter what area of athletics you're going to engage in, you're going to work with fans, and donors to some extent, and that usually happens in a social setting, and things are a little bit different there. So even if you have done all those things to be ultra prepared and worked hard and earned the respect of your colleagues, you are now in a different environment, again with mostly men, and you're not necessarily going to be seen in the same way. So you have to determine pretty quickly where your boundaries are. I think it's okay that everybody doesn't have the same boundaries. But understand what's acceptable when you're in those social environments, just like you guys do each and every time that you have a drink or go to dinner or whatever it might be. But that's an environment that's less controllable, typically less controllable than in an office. So I'd be curious what you all have experienced in that area.
Yeah, there is a difference, I think. I agree. But what's fascinating about that is it's probably a good master's thesis or dissertation project. All the research out there in philanthropy is that women are better fundraisers. By far, all the national research out there in the world of philanthropy. Yet, we're a small group in athletics. Right? And whether that's because stereotypically that we're thought to be like warm and fuzzy, good fundraisers, we're relationship people. For some reason, when you sit down in a room with a donor, they look at you differently. And I know just from when I was a development director at Bowling Green, and I would go on donor visits with the athletic director, he would talk to donors, and donors would talk to him differently than me. Yeah, it probably is a good thesis or PhD research project right there. Someone do it, it would be great.
Thank you for sharing those stories and being vulnerable and kind of reliving some of those learning moments and mistakes and being able to share those tidbits. The next question I'm going to direct to Elena first, and then we can see what everyone else thinks, just because I know this is your area of research and expertise. College athletics is a very diverse environment, and we know that sometimes the diversity of the student population is magnified within the student athlete population, but I think there still needs to be work in terms of how we're creating that inclusive environment. So I'm wondering what your suggestions or what your research is as to what we can do at a grassroots level and then building up to the administrative level to make athletics and college athletics more diverse and more inclusive.
If you could answer that, you'd probably make a whole lot of money. I think that every institution is going to understand better what works for their institution. So currently, I'm at Elms College. Our student population is the size of my high school. And so dealing with a student population so small, it's going to look very different than an institution the size of UConn. And I know UConn is about 5,000, is that about right? Yeah, so you know, even in the magnitude of the difference between our student body, it's gonna vary quite tremendously. But one thing that I really notice, and I think we'll notice along diversity lines, we're not talking about diversity in terms of race, we're not talking about diversity in terms of gender. It's an all-encompassing socioeconomic status, geography, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, all of these different components that come into play when we talk about diversity. And I think half of the battle is understanding where your students are currently. You know, at our school specifically, the majority of our racial diversity comes from athletics. Guess which sports, you know, and I think that's another layer to it, is just addressing the various indiscrepancies when how we're recruiting our student athletes versus what our student body looks like. And I think it's not only the inclusion that takes place within athletic departments, it's the institution as well. A lot of athletes are siloed within their athletic departments just based on time constraints alone. And so my role and what I've been really trying to do is have that grassroots, but also be making the policy to go along with it. So we've started a lot of student organizations. Diversity Leadership Council is one of them, where actually most of our student athletes are involved in that as well. And I think it's just, you know, creating really intentional programming where students are able to have a voice and feel as though they can advocate for themselves for change. But one thing that I'm very proud of is we're trying to start an institutional diversity committee within our institution holistically, where there are members across the campus. And because I'm the first full-time director of diversity and inclusion at Elms College ever. So not only are we worlds behind a lot of other schools, but I'm doing this and, you know, not really having a plan set up prior to me being there. And so starting this institutional diversity committee and having student voices on that committee, that was incredibly intentional. We need student leadership and student representation. So it's not only the grassroots, but it's also getting it implemented by administration because, you know, the inclusion, we're not just trying to check the box and say, okay, we're diverse, and now we have programs for students with various backgrounds. We're really trying to make sure we're appeasing the students because that's who we serve. So that's my biggest advice, and I mean, I think it's something that we can take away at any institution regardless of your size.
Sounds like hiring Elena is the solution to some of that. But the only thing I would add is it's really about intentionality and action. Forget anything else that we all like to talk about or do. You know, writing a diversity statement as part of an application process these days, or all of those different things that we now have become better at talking about. Mean nothing if you're not going to be intentional in each and everything that you do and take action. And we've got a lot of work to do on every campus and certainly in lots of areas of society across the country. And it's going to take everybody working together to make progress. And it's slow coming, but it's necessary and important and critical that we figure out how to take steps in that direction.
And I think too, Elena, I'd love to chat with you more about the topic because we need to do a better job of listening to our students too. And I think so many times there are those checkoff boxes, right? We've done this for this plan and this for this model or template, but we really need to be having good conversations with students about what do they want, what do they need, and then how do we work as a team to help them get what they need and want. Yep. We have to be having the conversations.
Thank you. So I'm gonna ask one more question so that we have enough time for the audience questions, because I know it's getting close to 7 and it's the last week of classes, so I'm sure everyone has a lot of studying to do. But the last question is, looking back on some of your more challenging moments or moments where you made some mistakes and learned some things, what advice would you give yourself, or what do you wish you had known in those moments?
Well, I think first of all, we talk about mistakes like it's something that's going to stay with you. And I think every mistake that you make is a learning experience. And so to really own that and be confident in that if you fall short somewhere, take responsibility, be accountable, and figure out how to put a plan in place so that you don't fall in that space again. The number of mistakes that I certainly made along the way are too many to recount, but I think you really look at them as growth experiences, and what you can learn from them, what you learn from others that make mistakes is really important. You hear a lot about in athletics, in a locker room, you'll have the wall of shame. Has everybody heard of those, wall of shame, or different things that they pull, usually not from their own institution, but it's whoever made a headline by making a bad decision, right? And the point of giving those examples is that you learn from what someone else has done incorrectly. So I think we have to embrace our shortcomings, embrace our faults, surround yourself with people that can fill those and help you grow in those areas, and really figure out that being vulnerable and learning and growing and embracing that piece is actually pretty powerful and can help breed confidence.
I think if I look back over the mistakes made, probably 2 things come to mind. One is I'm not afraid to ask for help now. When you get into a senior executive position or you're sitting in the AD chair, so much of your time is spent on personnel. So much of your time. And so if you're struggling with either a contract negotiation with a coach, if you're struggling with maybe you made the wrong hire in a coach, I learned it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to go to HR and say, I told them something I probably shouldn't have in a job offer, or just something. So I'm not afraid to ask for help. And then the other piece is, more times than not, go with your gut. Right? If your gut is telling you, I don't really think that's the right person, they're probably not the right person. And again, so much in the leadership role revolves around personnel. It's okay to ask for help and input, and a lot of times your gut is right.
Mine is pretty simple. I don't think that any of us got up here without taking risk. And getting to those positions, you have to take risk. And I think the biggest thing I would tell myself is take the risk on yourself. Because a lot of times I personally felt intimidated by going for a position. Kind of as you mentioned before, if you're not meeting all of the checklist boxes, there's no way I would have ever thought that at my age I'd be a full-time director of diversity and inclusion. Or there's no way that I thought that I would have been able to stay in college and graduate early after having a child. And I think there's a lot of obstacles that we're always coming through. And while it's important to make those learning opportunities, but realizing in that moment, it is going to end and it is going to be okay. Because I've relied a lot on other people in my family and in my relationships with coworkers and colleagues, to ask for help, but also be vulnerable and say, not only do I need help, but I think I need a little guidance in this area. Because if you're not willing to take the risk on yourself, you're not willing to grow. And there's so many times where I've gone to my boss and I'm just like, in my thing or in my area, it could be like an affirmative action issue. It could be an issue where somebody's like sexual harassment, those types of things. And if I'm not willing to say, hey, I need to pull in another person on this so that I'm not being biased, I can actually get the right information, then where are we going to go from here? This could be a lawsuit. This could be, somebody's life in some cases. And so I'm just really, in getting the positions, yes, it's important to take risks, but it's also really important to be vulnerable and say, hey, I need help with this.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for giving your insight and advice and sharing your stories. We just give them a round of applause. And now we have probably like 10-ish minutes for some questions. If anyone wants to raise a hand or shout out their question, we can go ahead and do that. You can direct it to the whole panel or a specific person, just feel free.
What would you say is the biggest piece of advice that you would give to the other young women that are in the room, especially like, this is a male-dominated area, but clearly you've shown that you can break down those barriers. So what do you think would be, aside from, the key takeaways that you all just listed, would be like the best part of advice that you could give to them?
So I guess I would give this to all of you. You all want to, my assumption is you all want to go work in the sports world, and knowing that there's not a ton of jobs out there, you have to shine, and you have to not be afraid to roll up your sleeves and dabble in everything, and not always be, am I going to get paid for that? I'm going to single her out, but Meredith over here, I know Meredith from, I used to be on the women's basketball committee, and we hosted the Sweet 16 last year in Bridgeport, and Meredith was a part of the making the whole thing happen. She worked with the officials. She escorted officials to and from the locker room, but anytime we had something go wrong, I knew I had Meredith to help. I knew it. So now when people are calling me about jobs for people, I'm like, Meredith, right? So she's not afraid to volunteer. She's not afraid to get her name out there and get in front of other people who someday will now know Meredith and will be able to help her get to where she wants to go. So, and that's just not for the women in the room. Like, you have to be willing to do some grunt work, and you have to be willing to, show up to the athletics department and be like, hey, I hear we're hosting this tournament. Can I help you? Because that's how you're going to get noticed, and not have it be all about, well, I got to get paid for that. So that's my advice.
Yeah, that's. I think you're right on. I'm not sure you could have said any better. But in particular, women, this doesn't change what they should do. But the number of younger professional women that will come in, and I'm sure this happens to all of us. But I get, how do I be an SWA? I want to be an SWA, and that's all you're focused on is where you want to get. First of all, an SWA isn't a thing. That's a topic for another night. But an SWA is not a job. But it's the same thing with young men. It's great to have dreams and to aspire to a certain role. So if you want to be an athletic director or the chief diversity officer, how about these two? That's a great thing to aspire to. But you've got to really dive in and be great at what you're doing now, because if you want to be great at that, you're going to have to be really good at what you got in front of you. So don't be in such a hurry. If you work hard, if you genuinely learn the business, there's going to be opportunities that are going to present themselves because you've invested in other people, you've invested in yourself, they're going to show up. If all you're worried about is getting here and you forget to look at what's in front of you, you're going to have a hard time.
I'm going to echo that on both sides. Sport is a rat race, and I cannot count the amount of times I've done work that you don't get paid for. You're just trying to get more experience and understand it. But I think in addition to taking those opportunities and really investing in yourself to learn the roles and the tricks of the trade, don't forget to take care of yourself. I think you're like, yes, this event, because I want that job. But if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to get a job anyway, because it's going to be so overwhelming. So not saying like take weeks and weeks and weeks off, but really understand, what's your like mental escape? Or, I still play volleyball every so often, and really figuring out, well, if I'm playing volleyball, can I also work a tournament that I'm playing in? Can I do something like that? And that's my biggest advice, because I think a lot of times as women, we're trying to do all of the extra, as I mentioned before, but really taking the opportunity and realize, I'm still human. We only have 24 hours in a day. I need sleep. So that's my biggest advice.
Going off that, what advice would you guys have for the men in the room that are aspiring sport business leaders, and how to kind of make sure to include women and to help them rise and continue to move up the world?
That's the best question I ever heard. I think you just did it. I think it's an awareness, no different than when we were talking about diversity, but you have to be aware of everybody around you and what their experience is and what lens do they see things through. So I think you want to be able to work with a wide variety of people, and so the way you're going to do that is through building genuine relationship and investing in somebody else's success. Whether that's a teammate on a sports team, it's your classmate, it's your professor. If you're equally invested in everybody around you, I think you're gonna find out you're gonna help them, and it's gonna help you just as much.
So I'll ask one to build off of Dan's, and we're gonna put you on the calendar for the SWA talk. So it was interesting to hear you share the similar experiences about donors, and that came up as a point where your gender was noted, right? And we know that donors are critical to college athletics as a foundational piece. So how can athletic departments and universities set up systems that are going to make sure that we get more women into those positions, and work with people that sometimes you have to, kind of do what they need to do to hope that the donors are going to look kindly on athletics, at the same time knowing that that's a very difficult role for younger women to be in, and then it can be perhaps constraining if they don't have that external focus. So it's not on the women, right? But what are the leadership, what folks in leadership doing to change that dynamic?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, I think it's about continued conversation, and some of the research I think is starting to help that. So not only are they, is there some studies out there that show they're great fundraisers, but it's also starting to talk about who's making decisions in a household. Is it men or is it women? And the majority, and they think it's even going to swing farther in the direction of females. And so how does that approach differ on the side of who might be making the request? So I think it's a piece of that, and not we used to say women, and this is still true. Women athletics still get pigeonholed in areas of student services and internal areas, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with pursuing and being passionate about the internal side of the business, but it needs to be because it's a choice, not because that's what they think you're capable of. So if they think you're not capable of dealing with funding or with football or with the $1 million donor who they assume is always going to be male, then that's where your challenge is. So I think it's about understanding and really embracing some of the research that's out there. And then you've also got to help, I think, young women that do get into that field feel safe and comfortable in that environment. So for us, it might be work. So if we are at a game or a pregame function where there's a social hour, right? That's work for us. But the people attending don't see it that way. They may be having a drink. They're that's their night out and that's their social activity. And we all know our behaviors change based on the environment that you're in. And so you've got to put them in an environment where they're going to be, you're going to protect them and really help them understand how to set boundaries so that they're comfortable in that scenario.
And I think too, we ourselves have to be confident in our ability. I mean, fundraising or development is two things. It's the art of developing or being able to develop relationships, and it's a discipline to ask for money. So if you don't know how to ask for money, you better learn how, or just don't go into development. But you have to be confident. Our lead fundraiser is Holly Strauss O'Brien, our SWA at Hartford, and she does a great job, but she knows how to build and develop real relationships and she knows how to ask for money. She's not afraid to do it, and she's very confident. Former UConn volleyball coach. But yeah, you have to put the right people in those positions. And you have to, when they're just getting started in the development world, it is a little bit intimidating to go sit down with somebody who can give you $50 million. It's also intimidating to go sit down with someone who can give you $50,000. So, because then it all just becomes zeros, right, to people. But you have to give them the tools to be successful, and you have to help them build confidence.
Holly, what's the worst thing they could do? Have you heard that before? That's it. That's it in a nutshell. That's what everybody's scared of, is somebody says no. What happens after they say no? You move on to the next one, right?
There's always someone else on the list.
I think also you need to trust who you're hiring. If you are in a position of power where you are hiring people, you need to be confident in their skills, and you should be. You hire them. And also really being an advocate for them. Again, I think back to the best mentors and the best role models that I've had. They were advocates for me in addition to, expanding my learning and my growth. And so if you're hiring somebody, especially somebody in a position where you're receiving money, it is so important to be an advocate for that person. And you don't need to say, oh yeah, this is the woman that we hired, we're so excited, first woman donor. But really just saying, this is somebody that we're confident in this job, and we are going to help advance her because it's only going to benefit the institution.
About one more question if anyone else has one. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. I just had some thank yous that I wrote down because there are a lot of people to thank that help us run these events. First, Subak, they've been a great partner for the past 2 years, and we really appreciated their financial support for some of our other events and just being there for us to guide us along the way. The sport management program, most of you are in that program, so we're all thankful for you for attending and asking great questions and being committed to be on the field. The digital media creative team, Isabella has been a great help this semester, and everyone in the program. We really appreciate you on social media and kind of helping engaging dialogue that way. Women Leaders in College Sport, we help partner with them on this particular event and bringing your lovely guests here, so appreciate that professional development opportunity for the women in the group. It's an awesome organization. Look into it. We can all provide some additional information if you have questions. And then also, literally all of the cultural centers across campus. They've helped market our events, support us along the way, bring in different speakers. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for participating and sharing your stories, sharing your advice, and have a good